I never imagined I'd find myself in this situation. I'm 29 years old, and up until a few weeks ago, I thought I had everything figured out. My fiancé, and Sarah, and I had been together for 3 years, and everything seemed perfect. We were engaged, talking about our future, and planning our wedding. I thought we were on the same page. We discussed where we would live, how many kids we wanted, and how we'd grow old together. The dream I had for our future felt so real, so secure. But as the weeks went by, something shifted in her, and in the relationship, something I couldn't quite place. At first, it started with small things. Sarah became a little distant, not in a dramatic way, but just enough for me to notice. When we talked, she wasn't as present as she used to be. The conversations we had about our wedding felt rehearsed, almost like she wasn't truly invested anymore. I chalked it up to the stress of wedding planning and the day-to-day pressures of life. I told myself that maybe she just needed some space. I could understand that. But soon, it became harder to ignore. The distance between us grew. It started with the late-night phone calls. I noticed Sarah taking more and more of them, always stepping out of the room to answer them. When I asked her about it, she'd brush it off casually, saying it was just work or family matters. "You know how it is, babe," she'd say with a smile, trying to ease my mind. But something about it didn't sit right with me. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid partner accusing someone of something without any real proof. But the more I thought about it, the more I began to wonder. And then came the trips. At first, it was just the occasional weekend getaway, and she'd always say it was to visit her family. I didn't think much of it. But over time, the frequency of these trips increased. She'd go away for a weekend here, another one there, always visiting her family, but the explanations never seemed to be very detailed. She never mentioned what exactly she'd be doing during these trips, or who she'd be seeing. It became a regular pattern, and slowly, I began to feel like I was being kept in the dark. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was just overthinking things. We had been talking about our wedding so much. Maybe she just needed a break from the constant planning and stress. But deep down, something didn't feel right. I could feel a knot forming in my stomach every time she left for one of those trips. Something told me there was more going on, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. After all, I trusted her, at least I thought I did. And then came the day that everything changed. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was looking through her bag for something. I didn't think much of it, I was just trying to find my wallet. But as I rifled through her things, I found something unexpected. There, hidden behind a folder, was a wedding invitation. My heart stopped. I pulled it out, and my worst fears were confirmed. There, in bold letters, was Sarah's name, and beneath it, the name of another man, the groom. The wedding was set to take place in her hometown in just 2 weeks. My hands trembled as I held the invitation. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, unable to process what I was seeing. Sarah, my fiancée, the woman I was supposed to marry, was planning to marry someone else. It didn't make sense. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I kept telling myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe this was just some misunderstanding. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the truth was staring me in the face. The late-night phone calls, the weekend trips, the secrecy, there was no denying it. I had to face the reality that the woman I trusted with my life, the woman I thought I would spend my future with, was planning a life with someone else. I couldn't just sit there and wait for more answers to fall into my lap. I had to confront this head-on. I needed to know the truth. So, I reached out to Emily, a mutual friend who had always been close to both of us. She was someone I trusted, someone who would know what was really going on. I asked her point blank, "Do you know anything about Sarah's wedding plans?" At first, Emily hesitated, clearly unsure of how to respond. But when I pressed her, she finally sighed deeply, and I could hear the reluctance in her voice as she said, "Yeah, she's been planning this for months. She's marrying someone else. Not you." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt the ground beneath me shift, like the world was crumbling. Sarah, the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, was going to marry someone else. The truth was undeniable, and it left me with an emptiness so cold, it was as if I couldn't feel anything at all. I was filled with a mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, confusion. Part of me wanted to confront Sarah right then and there, demand an explanation, ask why. But another part of me felt a darker urge, a desire for revenge. How could she betray me like this? After everything we'd shared? How could she lie to my face for months and then plan a future with someone else while I was kept in the dark? But as much as the thought of revenge consumed me, I knew deep down that it wasn't the person I wanted to be. I didn't want to let her actions change who I was. I didn't want to become someone filled with bitterness and hatred. What I needed was closure, not to be consumed by anger. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to let her get away with this without facing the consequences. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus at work, and I barely slept, my mind constantly racing. I kept replaying every moment we had spent together, wondering where it all went wrong. How had I missed the signs? Had I been so blind to the truth that I couldn't see the distance growing between us? Or had Sarah simply been good at hiding it all from me? I didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at me like a constant ache. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung, it was the fact that I had built my future around someone who was clearly willing to deceive me for months. I thought we were partners, that we were building something real together, but now it seemed like everything had been a lie. And as the wedding day loomed closer, I found myself torn. Part of me wanted to confront Sarah before it happened, to expose the truth before she walked down the aisle with someone else. But another part of me knew that if I did, it would only fuel the anger and resentment that was already bubbling inside me. I didn't want to become a man driven by revenge. Eventually, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't going to sit back and let her walk away from me without facing the truth of what she'd done. I reached out to the man whose name appeared on the wedding invitation, the man who was going to marry Sarah. I needed to know what he knew. Was he aware of the life she had with me? Was he just as blindsided as I had been, or had he been in on this deception all along? The conversation was awkward, to say the least. I introduced myself, and when I mentioned Sarah's name, I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "She told me everything," he said, his tone defensive. "We've been seeing each other for months." My blood ran cold. For months? The thought of Sarah betraying me with someone else, someone who had been in her life for so long, was almost more than I could bear. It was then that I realized the full scope of what had happened. Sarah hadn't just distanced herself from me, she had built a new life with someone else behind my back. But what now? What could I do? There was no easy answer. The only thing left was to face the truth, to let go of the woman I once thought I'd spend my life with, and to move forward, no matter how painful that might be. As hard as it was, I knew I had to make peace with it. It wasn't going to be easy, but I wasn't going to let Sarah's betrayal define me. I would rebuild my life, and in time, I would find someone who truly deserved my trust. I just had to take it one step at a time, knowing that in the end, I'd be stronger for it. That's when I made the decision. I would crash the wedding. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. I thought about it for days, weighing the pros and cons, considering the consequences. I had so many emotions flooding through me: anger, disbelief, confusion. But in the end, I knew I had to do it. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to be sure. My heart ached at the thought of seeing her marry someone else, but I couldn't let this moment slip by. I had to confront the truth head on. So, I bought a last-minute plane ticket to her hometown. I had no idea what to expect, but one thing was clear. This was the end of my uncertainty. The thought of the wedding, of Sarah walking down the aisle to say, "I do," to another man made my stomach turn. But I couldn't back out now. After everything she'd put me through, after all the lies, the secrets, and the broken promises, I had to see it for myself. I had to know if she had truly moved on, if the love we shared had meant nothing, or if this was just another elaborate ruse to cover up her betrayal. I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it would be. The day of the wedding arrived, and everything felt surreal. It felt like I was trapped in some strange dream. The church was grand, its tall stone walls soaring above me, adorned with flowers that seemed too beautiful to be real. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and roses, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled the room as guests mingled in eager anticipation. It looked like a fairy tale, one where everything was perfect. But I knew better. Nothing about this wedding was perfect. Not for me. Not after what she had done. I caught a glimpse of Sarah through the stained glass windows. She was standing at the altar, her face radiant, her eyes sparkling as she looked at her soon-to-be husband. For a moment, everything in my body screamed at me to turn away, to leave and pretend like none of this was happening. But I couldn't. I had to stay. I had to see her face, the one I thought I knew better than anyone else. The one that was now hiding something deep and dark that I hadn't been able to figure out until now. As I stepped into the church, the moment the doors opened, the room went completely silent. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room, and every eye turned toward me. My heart pounded in my chest, and my palms were clammy, but I forced myself to keep moving. I marched down the aisle, my eyes locked on Sarah's, my feet moving like they had a will of their own. Every whisper, every confused look from the guests only seemed to fuel my resolve. I wasn't here to apologize for my intrusion. I wasn't here to be the bigger person. I was here for the truth. The priest was mid-sentence, about to ask the groom if he took Sarah as his lawfully wedded wife, when I couldn't take it any longer. "Sarah!" I shouted, my voice breaking the tension in the air like a crack of thunder. She froze. Her smile faltered, and in that instant, I saw it, what I had been looking for all along. The facade had shattered. The look in her eyes was not the one of love or joy that I had hoped for, but one of guilt. She knew. She knew what was coming. The groom's face shifted from confusion to fury, but I didn't care. My heart was raw, and my emotions were spiraling out of control, but there was no turning back now. "You can't do this," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "You're already engaged to me." The room was dead silent. You could hear the whispers of disbelief ripple through the crowd. I saw Sarah's face drain of color, her hands shaking as she tried to process the situation. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel bad for her. I felt like I had finally taken control of my own life. This wasn't just about her. It was about me standing up for myself when everything had been falling apart around me. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "Don't even try to explain," I said, my voice sharp and cold. "You don't get to lie to me anymore. Not now, not ever." The words came out like venom, each one loaded with all the anger and hurt I had been holding in for so long. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of her lies. I was done. The groom, still utterly confused, turned to Sarah, demanding answers. "What is this? Who are you?" His voice was laced with frustration, disbelief, and a hint of fear. He had no idea what kind of mess he had just stepped into. I pointed a trembling finger toward Sarah, my gaze unwavering. "This is the woman who's been lying to you. She's been engaged to me for months, and now she's about to marry you behind my back." I could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. The guests were whispering, some exchanging looks of sympathy, others stunned into silence. But I didn't care. The truth was out, and I wasn't going to back down. I had spent far too long doubting myself, questioning my worth, and wondering what had gone wrong. Now, I knew. I had all the answers, and it was time for her to face the music. Sarah's eyes darted between me and the groom, her lips trembling as she tried to form some kind of explanation, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. She had been caught, and there was nothing she could say to change it. Turning on my heel, I walked toward the exit. My footsteps echoed in the hushed church, the sound of them mingling with the murmurs of disbelief behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I had just exposed the woman I thought I would marry for the liar she was, and in that moment, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like someone who had taken control of their own destiny, even if it meant destroying everything I had once believed in. As I stepped out into the fresh air, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. But at the same time, I felt emotionally drained, as if I had just fought a battle and won, but at a cost. I had just confronted the woman I thought I would spend the rest of my life with, and now I had to figure out what came next. The future was uncertain, but it was mine. Weeks passed since that day, and while I still thought about it, I no longer felt the burning anger that once consumed me. I had expected to be furious, to replay the moment over and over in my mind, but the anger slowly turned into something else, something more powerful. I realized that trust isn't something you can give away freely. It has to be earned, and it has to be protected. And I had learned something valuable from all of this. I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. There are still days when I feel the sting of betrayal. I think about what could have been if things had turned out differently. Maybe I should have seen the signs sooner, or maybe I should have confronted her earlier. But in the end, I did what I had to do. And I learned that sometimes, closure isn't about quietly letting go. Sometimes, it's about forcing the truth into the open, no matter how painful or messy it may be. Now, as I look forward to the future, I don't know where it will lead. It's uncertain, unclear, but it's mine. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. I'll heal. I'll move on. And I will make sure that no one ever makes me feel less than I deserve again. I've learned that I am worth more than the lies, more than the betrayal, and I will never settle for anything less than the truth.